Welcome to Space Mysteries, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. When tariffs first hit the headlines, they seemed distant, just numbers and politics. But soon, the impact became real. Iconic American brands like General Motors and Harley-Davidson started moving jobs overseas. These companies aren't just logos, they're woven into our lives and history. In this video, we'll look at 5 major corporations, GM, Harley-Davidson, Levi Strauss, Caterpillar, and Whirlpool, and how tariffs forced them to make tough choices. We'll move past politics to understand the real consequences for American workers and the future of manufacturing. Let's dive in. General Motors, Chevy, Buick, Cadillac, once the backbone of American industry. For decades, these brands symbolized not just cars, but the American dream itself. GM's factories hummed with activity, providing stable jobs and fueling the growth of entire towns. Families relied on GM paychecks, and communities thrived around the company's sprawling plants. The company's vehicles became icons on highways and in driveways across the nation, representing innovation, reliability, and a sense of national pride. But then, the landscape began to shift. The steel and aluminum tariffs were introduced, intended to protect U.S. producers from foreign competition. On paper, it sounded like a move to strengthen American industry. But for GM, these tariffs translated into billions of dollars in new costs almost overnight. The price of raw materials soared, and the company's carefully balanced budgets were thrown into chaos. Suddenly, every decision carried higher stakes. Every car, every part, suddenly cost more to make. The impact rippled through the entire supply chain, from the bolts and frames to the paint and electronics. Suppliers raised their prices, and GM had to decide whether to absorb the extra costs or pass them on to consumers. The pressure mounted on the factory floor, where workers wondered what the future would hold. GM faced a harsh reality: absorb the costs or make drastic changes. Executives pored over spreadsheets, searching for solutions. Could they streamline operations, cut back on less profitable models, or would they have to make the toughest call of all, closing plants and laying off workers? The choices were agonizing, with no easy answers in sight. The result? Shuttering North American plants and shifting production to countries like Mexico, where labor and material costs were lower. Entire communities watched as their lifeblood, the local GM plant, was closed and production lines were packed up and shipped out. For many, it felt like the end of an era. The backlash was fierce. How could an American icon move jobs abroad? Workers who had given decades to the company felt betrayed. Local leaders demanded answers, and national headlines questioned the wisdom of policies that seemed to drive jobs away instead of keeping them at home. The sense of loss was palpable, not just for the workers but for entire towns built around the promise of steady manufacturing work. But for GM, it was about survival. Competing globally meant cutting costs wherever possible. The auto industry is fiercely competitive, with rivals from Asia and Europe constantly innovating and undercutting prices. To stay afloat, GM had to make tough, sometimes unpopular decisions. The company's future and the jobs that remained depended on its ability to adapt to a rapidly changing world. The tariffs, intended to keep jobs in America, ironically pushed GM to look elsewhere. Instead of protecting American workers, the policy accelerated the loss of manufacturing jobs. The headlines told a story of unintended consequences as communities across the Midwest and beyond faced an uncertain future. Workers lost jobs, towns lost factories, and the ripple effects were felt nationwide. Small businesses that depended on GM employees saw their customer base vanish. Schools, restaurants, and shops struggled to survive. The loss of a factory meant more than just lost paychecks. It meant lost hope, lost identity, and a deep sense of dislocation for thousands of families. It's a stark example of how a policy designed to help can end up hurting the very people it aimed to protect. The story of GM is a cautionary tale about the complexity of global economics and the unintended consequences that can arise when well-meaning policies collide with harsh market realities. For GM, the choice wasn't about loyalty, it was about staying alive in a global market. The company's leaders had to weigh the needs of shareholders, employees, and customers, all while navigating a rapidly shifting economic landscape. Their decisions were scrutinized by the public, but the pressures they faced were immense. The story raises tough questions. Who really benefits from these policies? And what's the true cost for American communities? As families pack up and move away and once bustling towns grow quiet, the debate continues. Are we protecting American jobs, or simply shifting the pain elsewhere? In the end, the empty factories tell the real story. They stand as silent witnesses to a changing world, one where the answers are never simple and the costs are felt by real people in real communities across the nation. Harley-Davidson, an American legend, a name that conjures images of freedom, rebellion, and the open road. For over a century, Harley has been more than just a motorcycle company. It's been a symbol of American craftsmanship and spirit, a brand woven into the very fabric of the nation's identity. But even legends aren't immune to the forces of global economics. In 2018, Harley-Davidson suddenly found itself caught in a global crossfire, swept up in a trade war that would test its values and its future. It started when new U.S. tariffs raised the cost of steel and aluminum, key ingredients in every Harley bike. Overnight, the price of building their iconic motorcycles shot up, squeezing profit margins and putting pressure on the company's bottom line. But the real blow came from across the Atlantic. In retaliation, the European Union slapped a massive 31% tariff on American-made motorcycles. Suddenly, every Harley shipped to Europe cost thousands more, threatening to price them out of one of their biggest international markets. Harley couldn't just pass those costs on to European customers. Higher prices would mean fewer sales and losing ground in a market they'd spent decades building. The company faced a painful choice: absorb the losses or find another way. Their solution? Move production for European-bound motorcycles outside the US to places like Thailand. By building bikes overseas, Harley could avoid the tariffs and keep their motorcycles affordable for European riders. The reaction at home was swift and fierce. Loyal fans and workers felt betrayed. How could Harley, the most American of brands, build bikes anywhere but America? Protests erupted and the company faced a public relations storm, but Harley's leadership argued they had no choice: adapt or risk losing international sales, and with them, even more American jobs. It was a painful calculation, but one they believed was necessary for survival. Harley's dilemma was clear: protect their all-American brand identity or face the harsh realities of global business. The world was changing, and even icons had to evolve or risk fading away. In a global economy, Harley had to choose survival over symbolism. The move wasn't about abandoning America, it was about keeping the company afloat, preserving jobs, and ensuring that the Harley roar would be heard around the world for generations to come. The decision was controversial, but it kept the doors open at home and abroad. Harley's story is a powerful reminder of how protectionist policies can backfire, forcing even the most American brands to look overseas to survive. In the end, Harley-Davidson became a pawn in a much larger trade war, making tough choices to stay in the game. Their journey shows that in today's interconnected world, even legends must adapt to survive. The open road is still out there, but the path to get there is more complicated than ever. For Harley-Davidson, the ride continues, through challenge, change, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. Levi's, America's jeans. For generations, the brand has been woven into the fabric of American culture, symbolizing rugged individualism and everyday style. But despite their iconic status, Levi's jeans haven't been made in America for decades. The familiar red tab and sturdy denim are now products of a globalized world, far removed from their San Francisco roots. Over the years, Levi's built a vast global supply chain, relying heavily on China for both raw materials and manufacturing. Chinese factories became the backbone of Levi's production, churning out millions of pairs of jeans each year, destined for closets around the world. The efficiency and low costs offered by China made it the obvious choice for Levi's and countless other American brands. But then, a new challenge emerged. When the US government imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, the cost of doing business with China skyrocketed almost overnight. Suddenly, Levi's faced a harsh reality. Their jeans were about to get a lot more expensive to make and to buy. The company was at a crossroads. Should they absorb the higher costs and risk shrinking profits? Pass those costs on to customers and risk losing sales? Or perhaps find a new way forward by shifting production elsewhere? Each option came with its own set of risks and uncertainties. Ultimately, Levi's chose to diversify its supply chain. They began moving sourcing and manufacturing from China to other countries such as Vietnam and Bangladesh. These nations offered lower labor costs and fewer trade barriers, making them attractive alternatives for large-scale apparel production. But this shift wasn't about bringing jobs back to the United States. The reality is, the infrastructure for large-scale denim manufacturing simply doesn't exist in America anymore. Decades of offshoring have left U.S. factories idle, their machines gathering dust, and their workers long gone. Instead, the jobs and economic activity that once flowed to China now moved to other low-cost countries. Vietnamese and Bangladeshi workers took up the task of making Levi's jeans, while shipping routes and supply chains were redrawn across the globe. The tariffs, intended to punish China and revive American manufacturing, ended up simply rerouting global supply chains. American factories remained shuttered, while the flow of goods and capital found new paths around the obstacles. Levi's CEO, Chip Bergh, described the tariffs as a headwind, a force that didn't stop the company, but made every step more difficult. The company was forced into a massive logistical overhaul, rethinking every aspect of how and where their jeans were made. The result? A supply chain that's more complex than ever, with higher costs and constant adjustments. Levi's now juggles suppliers and factories across multiple countries, always seeking the best balance between cost, quality, and reliability. Levi's story is a powerful example of how, in today's globalized economy, capital and jobs flow to wherever the barriers are lowest. Trade policies and tariffs can shift the map, but they rarely bring manufacturing back home. In the end, the tariffs didn't bring Levi's manufacturing back to America, they just shifted it elsewhere, proving that in a world of global supply chains, the search for lower costs and fewer barriers never really ends. Caterpillar, builders of America's infrastructure and a global giant. Tariffs on steel raised their U.S. manufacturing costs, while retaliatory tariffs made their exports less competitive. The double hit: more expensive to build at home, harder to sell abroad. Caterpillar responded by shifting production for certain markets to their overseas facilities, especially in China. By assembling products abroad, they avoided steep import taxes. This wasn't about leaving America, but about staying competitive worldwide. The jobs building bulldozers for China moved to China, not by choice, but by necessity. Caterpillar's story is another example of how tariffs can push companies to move operations overseas. The global economy doesn't respect borders, companies adapt to survive. The irony: policies meant to protect U.S. industry sometimes make it more profitable to build elsewhere. For Caterpillar, it was a business decision, not a political one. Whirlpool's story is full of irony. They lobbied for tariffs on imported washing machines and got them. At first it worked. Imports got pricier. Whirlpool hired more U.S. workers. But then tariffs on steel and aluminum drove up their own costs. The advantage faded as production expenses soared. Whirlpool scrambled to control costs, sourcing more parts from countries not hit by tariffs. Even as they assembled machines in Ohio, more components came from abroad. The company that championed protectionism ended up relying on global supply chains to survive. Whirlpool's experience shows how interconnected the economy is. Tariffs in one area can undo gains in another. In the end, even the winners of a trade war face tough choices and unexpected costs. What's the lesson from these 5 stories? Tariffs forced iconic American companies to make hard, often painful decisions. Policies meant to protect jobs sometimes pushed them overseas instead. None of these moves brought manufacturing back to the U.S. They just shifted it around the globe. The real cost isn't just in dollars but in lost jobs, empty factories, and disrupted communities. In a complex global economy, simple solutions rarely work as intended. The stories of GM, Harley, Levi's, Caterpillar, and Whirlpool are a cautionary tale for the future of American manufacturing. Thanks for watching.